e-tron sales down confirms Tesla's dominance when it comes to EVs versus VW, Mercedes, GM, and other companies, much to the dismay of Bob Lutz and the plan that he put in motion that's still being used by other manufacturers. Is the first thing that we cover today in our show. The second thing we take a look at is that the Wall Street Journal has come out with another story, and that story focuses on the fact that there's a big problem going on between Panasonic and Tesla in their battery manufacturer relationship. And so we wanted to explore that a little bit from a different angle than what the Wall Street Journal had come up with. And I think you'll find the structure of our comments interesting. Also wanted to note, we'll follow up and say hello to all of you that say hello on our show. First of all, this is Greg from Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Today's kind of an exciting show. We got a chance to change up a few things and continuing to work on improvement with new mics and other things. So if you guys have suggestions or thoughts, we're open to them because we'd like to continue to grow and improve with your help. Wanted to first thank our subscribers and our Patreon supporters. If you do enjoy the show, we'd appreciate it if you would subscribe. Makes a big difference in the ability of our show to continue to provide good information and add value. A quick note here, I'm wearing my Stanford sweatshirt today because we actually won a football game that was of some consequence, so I had to celebrate in some way. So look out, Alabama. We'll be national champs in another 20 years, so be careful out there. I wanted to initiate our show today with the fact that there have been some numbers out on what's been going on with the e-tron. The basic numbers are that I just look at a snapshot from June. They sold maybe 1,200 cars. July, 1,100. August, I guess in the nines. And then in September, they were in at about 540 vehicles sold. And all those numbers reflect U.S. sales. So I wanted to mention that because I've been studying the car carefully to see how perhaps the best responder in major autos to Tesla's threat has been doing, both in products they put out as well as vehicles being purchased and how consumers are reacting. And so as you can see from the downward trajectory of those numbers, typically there's something called early adopters. The first people that get something, kind of test it out, see how well it works, and then they help other consumers make a decision on what they're going to do. And in essence, what's happening is those numbers those numbers are what I just described on a declining path. So we wanted to sort of dive into this a little bit. The decision was made by numerous companies. There would be an effort to not do a gigafactory. And so our estimate of the number of problems that happen is the fact that it's hard to get scale batteries if it's not your own factory. And the nature of those batteries affect things like quality of execution, et cetera. So there's a long list of problems. I mean, the biggest one is the model that was developed by GM with the Bolt is kind of the norm for the industry. In that case, you build the specs on the batteries, you ship it to Korea to be produced by LG or Samsung or one of the major long-term manufacturers of EV batteries, and then you sort of plug that battery pack in your car and then sell them. That model is kind of screwed, and one of the biggest reasons is that there's a 10 to 20% profit margin on those batteries that comes out of those factory setup. And as a result, when those cars go to the marketplace, just the battery alone is $40,000. And then you're building a car on top of that. So you either build a very cheap exterior, which in the case of the Bolt is kind of a $10,000 car body on top of a $40,000 battery, resulting in a $45,000 car that they're discounting heavily. And as Bob Lutz indicated, they were discounting heavily as a way to put pressure on Tesla and potentially take away customers from them. So we know how that went. The Bolt sales have continued to decline. They're a fraction of what Tesla has enjoyed. But our focus today is really the e-tron. So the second sort of structure of strategy that's been going on by the many manufacturers, in this case VW, is the fact that you take that $40,000 battery pack, you basically take the body of your largest SUV, and then you rip out the engine and toss in that battery pack, and now you have a $75,000 to $80,000 SUV. Consumers kind of can't tell the difference between their current and the EV product, and you actually save a lot of money because you're already making that body structure for other types of vehicles, so the development costs are kept down. So it's basically a retrofitted pre-existing SUV. Now, good idea relative to cost savings, bad idea relative to quality of execution. And what I mean by that is that once you take out the battery in the front engine, you now have a space there from a design standpoint that can be modified to optimize the aerodynamics of that vehicle. So I'm kind of not taking most of the competitors seriously until they basically shrink the nose of the front of the vehicle to get rid of the grille, which isn't needed for cooling, as well as to create more of a bullet shape on the front of the vehicle. Because even though that change is only a 10 to 15% difference in terms of the aerodynamics and the wind impact, every mile counts, or every percentage counts when it comes to EVs. So I'm going to make a prediction, and I'll look forward to you guys busting me on if it's bad or confirming if it's good. And that is that what I've really been looking forward to is what happens to e-trons between December and February in the United States at the coldest point. Even in the case of Tesla, some people have said they've seen a 50% decline in range during the coldest months, particularly when we go below freezing. Entirely possible because the battery has to warm itself to its optimal operating temperature. So when you have 300 mile of range, in the worst case scenario, if you lose 50 miles of your range, you now have a situation where you have 150 miles to work with. The reason I'm waiting for what happens to e-tron in the winter is that in cold countries like Norway, there have been statements suggesting that the e-tron goes from about 200 miles of range down to about 60. And so how might this happen? One, you have the battery warming itself so it can be functional. So let's say that consumes perhaps half of the battery life. And then you do things like, let's turn on the wipers, turn on the radio or stereo. There are a couple, you have your GPS running. So there are other battery consumption elements going on here, not to mention even using some of that battery to warm the cabin. So the possibility of a 60-mile range for an $80,000 to $100,000 EV is entirely possible. And so what I am anticipating is if we're in the warm months, I'm actually looking forward to, or the cold months, I'm looking forward to see what happens to sales, because if we're at 500 to 700 sales in the United States during the warm months, once we get into winter and the feedback is coming back from the early adopters that they really don't have the battery figured out and they can't do fast charging with their own network, I think this is going to create a lot of consumers saying, you guys aren't ready. And I think the sales could drop even further, especially in sort of above the Mason-Dixon line cities or the colder half of the United States. Now, Florida, Texas, all those places where the temperature is averaging in the 60s year-round, sales probably, do okay. But I just think that in general, the trend is towards severe sales decline in the process. So why I bring this up with the Bob Lutz series we have going is that Bob sort of established the blueprint for how the major makes would deal with Tesla. Number one, build vehicles, discount them heavily as a way to try to put Tesla out of business. Two, do not build a gigafactory because the Koreans have the long experience with it, and you simply treat it like another commodity part and have it shipped in and then integrated into the vehicle and sent to market. And so this sort of general blueprint has been the case of how Daimler-Benz, VW, basically all the manufacturers have operated because they don't have their own gigafactory. So as a result, we now have all of the makes, our major makes, heading down the same path in terms of delivering their vehicles to market. And in general, they're overpriced relative to what consumers are willing to pay in the largest market space, which is around 50,000 and below. Number two, there are battery shortages because everybody's trying to get the batteries from the same entities. And so there's a lot of factories being built to deliver those batteries. Number three, there's still no charging network. The theory was that each of the makes would invest in organizations that are building out charging networks and ride those networks as a way to get consumers fast charging. And we've seen how that's worked out, which is Tesla selling a ton of cars, competitors not. And I'm kind of fascinated because I met a Nissan Leaf owner who ended up selling and buying a Tesla. And I was just amazed at how he deliberately had his mental map planned where he knew the range that he could go from his house and out and park his car and then be able to make it back to the house for charging. And that's fine for a $40,000, $50,000 car on net. But for people who spend $100,000 for a vehicle, wanting to live a life of constraints like that when you spend $100,000 for a car is really, I don't think, realistic. So I therefore see why e-tron sales are limited thus far, but you do have to give credit to VW for both announcing and delivering a product and having it on the streets. One wonders though if Tesla actually had a full, worked out to have a full distribution across the United States, what sales of both e-tron and the Tesla products might be, because without a full build out of selling facilities in the United States, the e-tron is being sold 3-to-1 by the Tesla Model X. And so one would think that those numbers would be way, way higher if there was some sort of deal worked out on how Tesla is allowed to sell going forward. Hasn't happened yet, but we shall see soon. So long-winded conclusion here is that, I think the consumers are really making the statement about whether or not the solution provided by the e-tron/VW is adequate. And I think, sort of the next step is what happens with the Porsche Taycan, because it does have high-speed charging, even though it doesn't have a network, but it is an extremely high price. So we'll see how this works out, but it seems like a nice car. But in general, right now, Tesla is still destroying the competition in this space, despite the fact that they're spending a lot of money to make a difference. And the e-tron is the latest illustration of the fact that the Bob Lutz plan really doesn't work. The next thing I wanted to dive into for a few minutes is the fact that, as usual, the Wall Street Journal just found a negative angle on what's going on with Tesla. The latest is the fact that there's a battle between the management teams of Panasonic and Tesla in terms of what the future looks like going forward. We've kind of covered this in the past. Sort of the relationship started because basically Tesla went out, figured out who had the highest density for their batteries, which is Panasonic, and then Tesla signed a deal with them to build the Gigafactory. The problem they've run into, and I kind of see this, is that most Japanese manufacturers are very high quality focused, and they'll move as slow as possible to protect their reputations with quality of execution. Tesla's a very get everything out there, we can fix it later type of company. And so we're a bit surprised to see that 7,000 vehicles a week is about the number Tesla's at now in October of 2019. But the numbers were thought to be around 5,000 or 5,500 back in January or February of this year. So it seems kind of strange that we haven't had a nice buildup in the number of batteries being produced by Panasonic. And this has prompted a whole bunch of stuff that shows that Tesla is preparing to build its own battery cells. So for those of you who don't know, at the Gigafactory, it's not really one big factory. It was built with money from different manufacturers, including Panasonic and Tesla. But the way it works is that Panasonic has its own space in the factory where it produces batteries. There's then something called the handoff, where they put those battery packs or finished batteries on not even a conveyor belt. It's actually, they stack them up and then they ship them, and there's a doorway through which they come to be handed off into the Tesla portion of the factory to be automatedly built into packs and then combined with thermal management systems to be delivered products to the cars. So basically, it looks like one company, one building. It's really multiple companies operating there as their own entities and then coming together as you deliver a product. And Tesla selected Panasonic because they're the best and confirmed in many ways. The problem is that they're not building fast enough, because if they could double the production coming out of there, Tesla could now roll out the rest of its product lines that are planned without delay. But in the interim, they're kind of stuck. Now, the Wall Street Journal's analysis was that this shows that their relationship is fraying and there are all kinds of problems there, and hence Tesla's decision to make its own batteries. I actually beg to differ on that. I really think that the decision to have a sole source for batteries for all Tesla's cars was a bad idea. And the reason is that if you look at good fundamental corporate strategy, sole sourcing is a really bad idea for a whole bunch of reasons. And as Tesla perhaps builds a small production facility for its own specialty cells that could go into the cars, I just think that's smart business to have a way to step into production if you want to add more, or if you want to do specialty batteries for different vehicles. The other thing I forever have been trying to figure out is that Tesla has sort of the deepest and broadest amount of long-term research in the structure of lithium, or structure of batteries, particularly lithium-ion, out of Canada. And what never made sense to me is, with all that research being done, those solutions were being delivered to Panasonic, and then Panasonic was building the cells that were going from there. And so I just think that this represents an opportunity for Tesla to more move forward and sort of control its destiny better by producing its own batteries. Just a reminder, as the Chinese factory opens, one of the question marks is whose batteries are going to come out of there. Hopefully it's still the Panasonic-Tesla relationship, where Panasonic is shipping from Japan. Elon stated the battery is going to be a combination of some from Nevada, some from Japan, and some from local suppliers in China. We don't know the answer to that yet, but the teardown of the new vehicles built in China will be very interesting to find out what's happening, because basically everybody in the world, including Tesla, is constrained by battery production. And it seems like, based on the number of new competitors entering against Tesla that are former Tesla executives, the form factor of how Tesla builds a battery seems to be the current winning process before we move on to significant new battery production. So the Wall Street Journal takes it as a negative that Tesla's now building its own. I'm now a rep for a company called Aflac, and so if we'd appreciate it if you'd consider us. We're nationwide able to provide employee benefit services to business owners, and you can drop us a note on our Teslafaninsight on Facebook if there's an interest in great ways to add disability from Aflac to your company's product line. At any rate, I'm very much looking forward to all comments. I saw Gareth, wie geht's versteht's, to my friend from Germany who's saying hello. Hope you found our comments regarding the shifting shifting processes. Roger just made a comment regarding the fact that Maxwell will allow 16 times faster something, but we haven't seen Maxwell come out yet. And one of my arguments is that I think Maxwell is good product. If it was immediately viable, it'd be integrated into what Tesla's doing, but it's still in development process. And I just think that there's a lot of processes like superconducting, they're going to sort of arrive at the same time, including the Maxwell products. So it'll probably be a winner, but don't be surprised if it ends up being in a battle for better solutions as we move on to the next generation of electric batteries across a number of ways to solve the electricity problem. So yeah, I think Maxwell is good, but I also, that's my thought there. Another thing that pops up is that we've been having conversations about the fact that Elon is kind of bored and he just acquired another company to aid in the camera technologies and autonomous. And so my back and forth with one of our viewers has been about the fact that what we found is if there isn't a fire that Elon is putting out, a crisis, he tends to sort of get bored where everything's working pretty well. The solutions that they've come up with are working, so now he can sort of deviate and work on other things. And so that might be an acquisition or an announcement that he's going to take over the company or whatever. The latest iteration is the fact that, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but every 6 months, the person running autonomous at Tesla keeps getting fired. And so we basically have a situation where we've gone through the latest fire, the head of it, Elon takes over, and his next move to solve that has been to acquire a company that specializes in autonomous and sort of make the CEO of that company the head of that unit to sort of move it forward better. So I call it Elon boredom. You can call it what you want, but what we've noticed is that as everything is working smoothly, he has more time on his hands to sort of explore projects or acquisitions that he couldn't do previously. And it just shows he's a bright guy. And in order to stay on top and move forward, you definitely have to keep innovating. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I definitely think that it's not a locked-in future yet for how electric is going to work on a whole bunch of different fronts. And so his curiosity and willingness to get out there and put in some energy to sort of broaden the footprint of what Tesla's doing, I think it's just good business. To be honest with you, this show was supposed to be focused on why is it that Tesla's stock price continues to drop every time they announce good production numbers and the earnings from those numbers. And so that's actually our next show. We'll be shooting by Friday of this week. The goal is to shoot it tomorrow. And I think you guys will find it interesting as earnings from Tesla come out. We're expecting the stock price to fall for a number of reasons. And so I look forward to us covering that as our next show. We look forward to your participating in that as well, because I do think it's a money-making opportunity for you. At any rate, we're trying some new mic stuff. Would love your comments on that and any other items that come to mind. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss, Germany. Hedge du, Sweden. Au revoir, French. Zdravstvuyte, Russian. Ni hao ma, Chinese. Khoda Hafez, Farsi. Lahitrot, Hebrew. And in Jamaica, we say, Nof respect Walkwood. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to your comments, and we very much appreciate your time, and would appreciate it if you take time to subscribe, and if you can support on Patreon, that would be appreciated as well. Have a great day, and thanks for the comment, John Junkin. Have a great day, and bye for now.